I pretended to be poor for 2 years. My girlfriend's reaction to my real net worth was insane. My name is Mark, and I'm 29 years old. For the last 2 years, I've been living a lie, a complete, total, and utterly exhausting lie. You see, on paper, I'm one of those guys you read about in tech magazines. I founded a software company right out of college, a little startup that somehow caught fire. By the time I was 25, it was valued at over $50 million. After a second round of funding and selling a stake, my personal net worth landed somewhere around $12 million. I drive a car that costs more than most people's homes. I own a penthouse apartment with a view that could make a movie star weep, and I can buy basically anything I want without a second thought. But for 2 years, none of that existed, at least not in the life I shared with my girlfriend Emily. It all started after my last serious relationship. Let's call her the leech. We were together for a year and things seemed great. But as my company started to take off, her personality began to shift. Suddenly, the conversations weren't about our future. They were about the future she deserved. The handbags got more expensive, the dinner suggestions got fancier, and the subtle hints about a proper engagement ring became less subtle. The breaking point was when I overheard her on the phone with a friend laughing about how she'd hit the jackpot and wouldn't have to work a day in her life. That was it. I was done. The idea of being loved from my bank account instead of my soul was my biggest nightmare. So I decided to conduct an experiment, a cruel, maybe insane, but necessary experiment. I was going to find someone who loved me for me, the guy I was before the money. The guy who ate ramen, drove a beat-up Honda, and thought a $50 dinner was a splurge. So I created a new identity. I moved out of my penthouse and into a cramped one-bedroom apartment in a completely different part of the city, a place where the peeling paint and rumbling furnace were my new roommates. I garaged my Porsche and bought a 2008 Toyota Corolla with a dent in the side and a mysterious stain on the passenger seat. I told everyone I was a mid-level project manager at a small tech firm. In reality, that small tech firm was my own company, and I was just showing up for board meetings once a quarter in a back entrance, looking like I just crawled out of a cubicle. It was the most difficult acting job of my life. I had to bite my tongue when people complained about their jobs, pretend to be stressed about a fictional deadline, and calculate the exact amount of groceries I could buy on a modest salary to make it believable. It was a lonely existence, a double life that was slowly eating me alive. But I was determined. I needed to know if real, unconditional love was even possible in a world as cynical as ours. And then, on a rainy Tuesday, in a coffee shop that smelled like burnt beans and damp wool, I met Emily. She was fumbling with her umbrella, a splash of coffee on her sleeve, and a frustrated look on her face. And in that moment, I thought, maybe, just maybe, this experiment could actually work. The first 6 months with Emily were like a dream, a very, very modest dream. Our first date wasn't to a Michelin-starred restaurant. It was a walk through a public park, followed by hot dogs from a street vendor because the fancy food truck was too expensive. I remember her laughing as mustard dripped onto her chin, not a care in the world. She was a graphic designer for a small nonprofit.
A job she loved, but that paid next to nothing. She was passionate, kind, and had an energy that didn't seem to depend on external validation. She found my boring project manager job endearing, and my beat-up Corolla, which I'd nicknamed the Beast, became a running joke between us. She'd say, "Don't scratch the beast," as she carefully closed its creaky door. Our dates were a masterclass in frugality, and she embraced every moment. We'd go to free museum nights, cook spaghetti at my tiny apartment using a single dented pot, and spend weekends hiking instead of going to expensive brunches. She never once complained. In fact, she seemed to relish it. She'd praise my budgeting skills and tell me how much she admired that I wasn't materialistic. Every time she said something like that, a pang of guilt would shoot through me. I was living a lie, and the person I was lying to was the very person who seemed to embody everything I was looking for. The lies were a constant heavy weight. I had a secret second phone for business, which I had to hide like a contraband device. If I had to take an emergency call from my CEO, I'd pretend it was my boss Dave from the small tech firm complaining about a server issue. I'd pace around my tiny apartment, discussing multi-million-dollar contracts in hushed tones, all while picturing my actual office on the top floor of a skyscraper downtown. The true test came about a year in. We were invited to the wedding of one of her college friends. The other boyfriends were lawyers, investment bankers, guys who talked about their stock portfolios and their recent trips to Ibiza. When I was asked what I did, I gave my standard line. I saw a few of them exchange pitying glances. Later, one of them, a guy named Chad, in a suit that probably cost more than my entire fake apartment's furniture, made a loud joke about someone having to be the project manager. Before I could even muster a fake smile, Emily stepped in. She looked Chad dead in the eye and said, with a voice full of ice, "He's brilliant at what he does. And he's also the kindest, most honest man I know. That's worth more than any stock portfolio." The table went silent. I just stood there, my heart swelling with a feeling so intense it was almost painful. She was defending a lie, but the sentiment behind it felt more real than anything I'd ever experienced. That night, lying in my squeaky bed, I stared at the water-stained ceiling and thought, this is it. I found her. I actually found her. But the lie was now a mountain, and I was standing at its base, wondering how I could ever possibly climb down without causing an avalanche. 2 years. 2 years of carefully constructed lies, of hiding my real life, of pretending that a leaky faucet was a major financial crisis. Our relationship had deepened in ways I never thought possible. We'd moved in together, into a slightly bigger, but still decidedly modest 2-bedroom apartment. We talked about the future, about maybe one day getting a dog, or taking a road trip up the coast. The conversations were always framed by our supposed financial limitations. "Someday, when we save up enough," she'd say, looking at travel blogs. Each time she said that, the guilt gnawed at me a little more. I had the means to give her the world, but I was forcing her to dream in a tiny fenced-in yard. The catalyst for the end of the charade was, ironically, a ring. I decided I was going to propose. I couldn't do it with a cheap fake ring from a mall kiosk. It felt like an insult to her and to the real love I had developed for her. But I also couldn't just walk in with a $50,000 diamond. How would I even begin to explain that? "Oh, this old thing, I found it in a Cracker Jack box." The entire facade was built on a foundation of financial mediocrity, and a proposal was the one thing that would shatter it. I realized I couldn't propose to the woman I loved while still being a fraud. The test was over. I had my answer. Now I just had to figure out how to tell her without losing her forever. The plan had to be cinematic. It couldn't just be a conversation. That would be too blunt, too much of a shock. I needed to create a narrative, a story that would ease her into the truth. I decided to stage a sudden and miraculous career change. The story was that my small tech firm had been acquired by a massive corporation, and as a key project manager, I was getting a huge promotion, a massive bonus, and a complete lifestyle upgrade. It was a lie, but it was a bridge from my fake life to my real one. For a week, I prepared. I rented a sleek, black Audi A8, the kind of car I'd never be caught dead in because it was too new money. I bought a tailored suit that felt alien on my body after years of worn-out jeans. I made a reservation at the most exclusive, most expensive restaurant in the city, the kind of place you have to know someone to get into. I was creating a character, the newly successful Mark, and I was about to ask Emily to meet him. The entire time, my hands were shaking. This was the biggest gamble of my life. I was betting $12 million and the love of my life on a single crazy night. As I got dressed in the suit, looking at a stranger in the mirror, I felt a surge of adrenaline and terror. This was it, the night the truth came out. I pulled the rented Audi up to our apartment building, the engine a low, sophisticated purr that was completely out of place in our gritty neighborhood. I texted her to come down. When she walked out, she was wearing the same nice dress she'd worn to her friend's wedding over a year ago. It was the best she had, and she looked beautiful. But when she saw the car, her face wasn't filled with excitement. It was a mask of pure, unadulterated confusion. She walked around at once, her brow furrowed, before looking at me, standing there in my expensive suit. "Mark," she said, her voice full of suspicion, "is this a joke? Did you win the lottery or something?" I just smiled, trying to look cool and collected, while my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I opened the passenger door for her. "Not exactly," I said. "Just a really, really good day at work. Let me explain over dinner." The drive to the restaurant was silent. She kept glancing from the window to me, her expression a mixture of awe and deep-seated worry. At the restaurant, a maitre d' greeted me by the fake name I'd made the reservation under and led us to a secluded table with a view of the city skyline. Emily looked utterly overwhelmed. She kept her voice low as she whispered, "Mark, what is going on? We can't afford this. A single glass of water here probably costs $50. I reached across the table and took her hand. "Don't worry about it," I said, my voice steady. "Remember that acquisition I mentioned might happen? It happened. The company that bought us out, they were very impressed with my work. They gave me a new position, a vice president role, with a very, very substantial bonus." I laid it on thick, describing my new fictional responsibilities, talking about stock options and a corner office. I was basically just describing my actual life, but framing it as a recent shocking development. As the night went on, she slowly began to relax. The initial shock gave way to genuine happiness for me. She was beaming, asking questions about my new role and telling me how proud she was. But even in her joy, there was a flicker of caution. "This isn't going to change you, is it?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. "We're still us, right?" I assured her that nothing would change, that I was still the same guy who loved hot dogs and cheap hikes. It was the most ironic thing I had ever said. After dessert, I decided it was time for phase 2. I told her my new boss wanted to celebrate with me at a private party at the company's new headquarters. I said I wanted her to be my date. I led her out of the restaurant and back to the Audi. But instead of heading towards the business district, I drove towards the gleaming glass skyscraper that housed my real company. I parked in the private underground garage reserved for executives. I swiped a key card to open the main doors, long after the building had emptied for the night. "The party's on the top floor," I said, my voice barely a whisper. We stepped into the private elevator and I pressed the button for the penthouse. As the elevator ascended smoothly, the city lights twinkling below us, I could feel her tension returning. The elevator doors slid open, not into an office, but directly into the foyer of my sprawling, multi-million-dollar penthouse apartment. Her jaw dropped. Her eyes widened as she took in the floor-to-ceiling windows, the original art on the walls, the minimalist, expensive furniture. She turned to me, her face a canvas of disbelief and dawning horror. I saw a flicker in her eyes, something I couldn't quite read. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't greed. It was something else entirely. And in that moment, I knew the real test was just beginning. The silence in the penthouse was deafening, broken only by the soft hum of the climate control and the distant sound of the city below. Emily stood frozen just inside the doorway, her eyes wide, scanning the space as if she were trying to convince herself it was real. She took a few tentative steps, her hand trailing along the back of a leather sofa that cost more than our old car. She walked to the massive windows, looking down at the tiny cars and lights, a view she had only ever seen in movies. I watched her, my own heart a frantic drum against my ribs. This was the moment, the climax of my 2-year experiment. "Emily," I began, my voice cracking, "there is no party. There is no new boss. There is no acquisition." She turned slowly to face me, her expression unreadable. "I don't understand," she whispered. I took a deep breath, the words I had been rehearsing for months now feeling clumsy and inadequate. "I don't work at a small tech firm, Emily. I own it. This building, this is my company's headquarters. And this," I said, gesturing around the room, "this is my home, my real home." I told her everything, the whole sordid story.
I told her about my ex, the leech, and how her betrayal had sent me into a spiral of distrust. I explained my insane plan to find someone genuine, to build a relationship on a foundation of lies. I told her about my real net worth, the $12 million, the cars, the life I had hidden from her. I laid my soul bare, every selfish, manipulative, and fearful part of it. I expected, well, I didn't know what to expect. Tears of joy? A hug? Anger? I was prepared for a lot of things. I was not prepared for what happened next. There were no tears of joy. There was no hug. At first, there was just a long, heavy silence. She just stared at me, her face pale. Then a single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. But it wasn't a tear of relief or happiness. It was a tear of pure, unadulterated hurt. 2 years? She finally said, her voice trembling with a rage so cold it was terrifying. 2 years? You let me live in that crappy apartment? You let me worry about paying the electric bill? You let me feel guilty about ordering a pizza? All while you had this? Her voice rose, cracking with emotion. You didn't fall in love with me, Mark. You put me in a cage. You watched me. You tested me. I wasn't your girlfriend. I was a science experiment. She started pacing, her movements sharp and agitated. All those times I told you I loved you for who you were, not what you had? You were just taking notes, weren't you? Judging my reactions? Was that night at Chad's wedding just another data point for you? A successful result in your little lab? Her words were like knives, each one perfectly aimed at the darkest, most shameful part of my soul. I tried to interrupt, to explain, but she held up a hand, her eyes flashing. Don't you dare try to justify this. You didn't trust me, not for a single second. You created a person, a poor, simple Mark, and you made me fall in love with him. But he doesn't exist. He never did. She walked over to a console table against the wall, where I had a bowl of high-end designer keychains. She picked one up, a heavy metal piece from a luxury brand, and looked at it. Then, with a sudden, gut-wrenching finality, she walked into my master bedroom. I heard the sound of drawers opening and closing. A minute later, she emerged, carrying one of my expensive leather weekend bags. She had started filling it with things from my closet, a cashmere sweater, a designer watch. It wasn't a frantic looting. It was a deliberate, symbolic act. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a profound sadness that was worse than any anger. You wanted to see how I'd react to your money? She said, her voice hollow. Well, here's your reaction. I hope it was worth it. She zipped up the bag, slung it over her shoulder, and walked past me towards the elevator. She didn't look back. The elevator doors opened, she stepped inside, and they closed, leaving me standing alone in the vast, silent, and suddenly empty expanse of my penthouse. I had everything I had ever wanted, and I had just lost the only thing that truly mattered. The next few days were a special kind of hell. The penthouse, which I had always seen as the ultimate symbol of my success, now felt like a mausoleum. The breathtaking view of the city was just a constant reminder of the lie I had built. Every expensive piece of furniture, every piece of art seemed to mock me. I tried to work, but I couldn't focus. I'd stare at my computer screen, replaying the look on Emily's face over and over again. The shock, the hurt, the cold, final rage. I had gone into this thinking I was the one in control, the one running the experiment. But she had turned the tables on me. Her reaction wasn't the one I had anticipated. It wasn't about greed, it was about dignity. She wasn't angry that I was rich. She was furious that I had deceived her, that I had treated her love like a variable in a twisted social experiment. I started to see the whole situation from her perspective, and the view was ugly. I had been so consumed with my own fear of being used that I had completely dehumanized her. I had never given her the chance to be a partner, to share in my life, the good and the bad.
I had made a unilateral decision for both of us based on a past trauma. I wasn't a noble romantic. I was a coward, a controlling, manipulative coward who had built a fortress of lies and was surprised when the person I invited in felt trapped. The irony was suffocating. In my attempt to find someone who loved the real me, I had never actually shown her the real me. I had shown her a character, a projection of my own fears. I tried to contact her. I called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I sent text after text, a stream of desperate, rambling apologies. "I'm so sorry. I was an idiot. Please, just talk to me. I love you." They all went unanswered, marked as delivered, but never read. I drove by our old apartment building, hoping to catch a glimpse of her, but her car was gone. I even considered going to her nonprofit office, but I couldn't bring myself to cause a scene. I was trapped in my luxury prison with nothing but my wealth and my regret for company. I realized then that my $12 million was worthless. It couldn't buy me her forgiveness. It couldn't turn back time. It couldn't undo the damage I had done. Her insane reaction, as I had framed it in my head, was actually the most sane and self-respecting response possible. She had refused to be a prize in my game. She had walked away from the money, from the luxury, from me, because her self-worth was not for sale. And in that moment, I fell in love with her all over again. Not for the person I thought she was, but for the incredible, strong, and principled person she had proven herself to be. I had spent 2 years trying to find someone who wasn't after my money, and I had found someone who valued her own integrity far more than any dollar amount. I had lost her, but in a way, I had finally found the answer I was looking for. A week after she left, just as I was sinking into a state of despair, my phone buzzed. It wasn't a call, it was a text. The name on the screen made my heart stop. It was Emily. The message was short, simple, and utterly terrifying. "We need to talk. Meet me at the old place." The old place? The coffee shop where we had first met. My mind raced. Was this the end? Was she coming to tell me to never contact her again? Or was there a sliver of hope? I didn't know. But as I grabbed my keys, I realized it didn't matter. I was going, and this time there would be no lies. The coffee shop smelled exactly the same, a familiar blend of burnt coffee and damp wool that I had once found comforting, but now felt like a judgment. I was there 10 minutes early, my hands clammy, my stomach in knots. I hadn't been able to bring myself to drive one of my nice cars, so I was in the Toyota Corolla, the Beast, which felt more appropriate for a day of reckoning. I saw her walk in a few minutes later, and my breath caught. She looked the same, yet different. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her hair tied back in a ponytail. But there was a new hardness in her eyes, a guardedness that hadn't been there before. She sat down across from me, not with a smile, but with a quiet, solemn expression. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. We just looked at each other, 2 years of shared memories hanging in the air between us, tainted by the enormity of my deception. Finally, she broke the silence. Her voice was calm, measured. She told me she had spent the last week at her parents' house trying to process everything. She said she felt like a fool, like her entire reality had been a fabrication. She explained that the anger she felt wasn't about the money. It was about the profound lack of trust. She said, "I fell in love with a guy who worked hard, who was kind, who worried about bills with me. I fell in love with a partner. But you weren't my partner, Mark. You were my puppet master." Her words stung, but they were true. She continued, saying that the person she was angry at was the man in the penthouse, the man who had orchestrated the whole thing. But the person she missed was the guy in the beat-up car, the guy who made her laugh until she cried. She admitted that she was confused, that her heart was telling her one thing and her head was telling her another. I listened to every word, letting them wash over me. When she was done, I didn't make excuses. I didn't try to defend myself. I just apologized. I apologized for the lies, for the deception, for the arrogance, for the fear that had driven me to it. I told her that she was right, that I hadn't trusted her, and that failing to trust her was the biggest mistake of my life. I told her that I was willing to give it all up, the money, the company, the penthouse, if I could just go back to the way things were, but this time with complete honesty. I looked her in the eye and said, "I don't want to test you anymore, Emily. I don't want to run an experiment. I just want to be with you, the real me, whoever that is, if you'll still have me." She looked at me for a long time, her expression unreadable. The silence stretched on, each second feeling like an eternity. Then, slowly, a tiny smile touched the corner of her lips. It wasn't a full, beaming smile, but it was a start. "The guy in the beat-up car," she said softly, "he was a pretty good guy." She took a deep breath. "I can't just forget what you did, Mark. The trust is broken. It's going to take a long time to fix it." My heart sank, but I nodded, ready to accept her decision. "But," she continued, "I'm willing to try, on one condition." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. "No more secrets, no more lies, not about anything. We start over, from zero. We get to know each other again, the real us, the rich guy and the nonprofit girl. And we see if we can make it work, without the masks." A wave of relief so powerful it almost brought me to my knees, washed over me. I agreed, of course. I would have agreed to anything. We left the coffee shop and walked out into the afternoon sun. I didn't take her hand. We weren't there yet. But we walked side by side, two people with a complicated past and an uncertain future, but for the first time walking in the same direction, with the truth between us. I was still the same guy with $12 million, and she knew it. But in that moment, walking down the street towards my beat-up Toyota, I felt richer than I ever had in my entire life. I had learned that true wealth isn't measured in a bank account, but in the courage to be vulnerable and the grace of someone willing to give you a second chance to get it right.